Welcome to Into the Current, where we explore trends in business, marketing, and culture. But right now, due to what's going on in our country and in our culture, we've decided to focus our energy on amplifying the voices of people of color in our community so we can learn from them and support the pursuit of social justice and equality in America. Our guest today is a very good friend of mine, Sharif Hassan. He's a freelance photojournalist who's been covering the recent civil rights protests and demonstrations here in the city of Atlanta. Sharif, I love you, man. Thanks for joining us today on Into the Current.
Yeah, man. Pleasure to be here.
Let's just get right into this. You have been in the streets in Atlanta for 10, 11, 12 days, and last Monday, so I guess 8 days ago, last Monday night, you were out after curfew, taking photographs of protesters, and something happened to you. Why don't you tell me what that was?
So Monday there were a bunch of different protests that were going on that day, starting from the morning, including ones that had happened earlier out by the Capitol several hours earlier, that had police officers firing on, or I guess military squad firing on just regular citizens that were peacefully protesting with tear gas and rubber bullets. And then later on that evening, there were a bunch of protesters in front of the CNN Center in that area where it had been like kind of the hot spot for the whole thing. And that's kind of where I parked my bike as well. So, of course, all the officers and military push us forward, which is, I guess, going north on Centennial. And as they're pushing us north, they have us blocked from the north end as well. So it pushes you down and then out the side. One of the side roads, usually like Lucky Street or something like that. So we're getting pushed through. And I'm walking just to do a lap around the block. But there are some folks on the sidewalk that are getting yelled at by officers, and they're just yelling back at them like, hey, we're just on our way back to our car. It's not that big of a deal. And then they go to arrest them, and one dude runs, and I run in after him just to make sure there's like no foul play. And as I'm taking photographs of him, I get arrested and taken down. So we all got charged the same misdemeanor, which was a curfew violation.
And just to be clear, you were out in the street after the stated curfew, right? I mean, let's just be
factual.
Yeah. And
it was literally like minutes after curfew. Everybody had just dispersed from the protest and was getting, like I said, was getting pushed out. But there weren't that many people that were out.
And so in your observation, were the people that you were following and taking pictures of, were they sincerely trying to leave the area?
They were trying to leave because I wasn't actually following them out of the area. I was just leaving myself. And there were like a couple of other journalists that were with me at the time, or not journalists. I believe that there are a couple of other news companies and then one other lady that was shooting a blog, and that's where I got the footage of me actually getting arrested.
Yeah, so there's actually a video of you being arrested as you're running up to take pictures. I believe it was a police officer. I saw the video, and what I saw was an officer that came up kind of behind you, and you got down, and it I was glad to see that. It seemed to be very controlled arrest, at least in your case. I don't know about the people that you were taking pictures of. What was their experience like, and what was yours like?
I mean, we all ended up on the same bus together, so I mean, the reality of it is that like none of us really gave the officers a reason to use force. Plus, like, other than what had happened earlier in the day, everything else had been peaceful. All the protesters have been pretty peaceful for the most part. I know on Friday things got pretty out of hand, but but beyond that, the days have really been peaceful outside of police and military intervention.
Some of the pictures that I've seen that you took and that have been on Instagram. So Sharif's Instagram handle is Sharif H3. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Sharif H3 on Instagram. Check out his photos. They're really some incredible photos, which I believe is that Friday night, right? That you took the photos outside of CNN Center. Why don't you tell us about that night specifically and what it was like to be in those demonstrations, and a couple of those photos that you captured to me were really extremely powerful. One in particular with an African-American man on top of a police car's on fire, and then there's another one, there's a police officer that's wearing a mask and just has a lot of emotion in his eyes. Tell us, what was it like to be down there in that moment? What were you feeling?
I mean, it was intense. I mean, nobody wanted to be there, as far as, nobody wanted to be there. Everybody kind of had to be there, It was just one of those things where there was intensity on both sides. There was a lot of kind of intimidation factor because we came in, where I had come through was from the backside of Centennial, where it was like in front of the CNN center in the stadium. And they had kind of had that whole area set up for SWAT and military vehicles. So then, as me and one of my buddies that had started to ride along, we cruised down, and we were actually on the police side of things with the rest of the press, and on the side of the military vehicles. So it was really interesting to see how those trucks moved in on everybody. It was interesting to see how, I've been to a lot of protests, and it was pretty kind of erratic. It was like kind of disorganized and kind of in disarray. It's like things would be happening in all different areas. It was kind of like any one big spark would be attention grabbing and would move people, and it was a very volatile type setup. So you kind of didn't know what was going to happen, and once things did happen, they would just escalate. For example, like once people started throwing things at the CNN windows, it's like once those things started going, it was like rocks were flying. People were like throwing bottles, whatever bottles that they had, glass or whatever, spray painting on the CNN sign. And then obviously like the police cars, and one of the protesters had mentioned they had pulled up a bunch of police cars on the northern side. So up past the CNN sign was like a row of police and military vehicles. And then below it, before that Marietta intersection, were probably about eight police cars, I'd assume. Being all older, whatever. And one of the protesters had mentioned, he's like, don't be fooled. These are all like old police cars. Like all their stuff has been taken out of them, all this stuff. And people just kind of started breaking them and lit one on fire, destroyed pretty much all eight, had damage to them. And then things just like continued to escalate. For my side, I was kind of moving towards the west side of Marietta, where they had kind of smashed all the windows from that section of CNN, from like the front to the side, and then to the Omni Hotel, all the way to like Stats and Max's Pizza. So that had
when you're down there and that's happening, right? So police cars are starting to get lit on fire. The crowd's becoming more volatile. You're there as a journalist. You're there as a photojournalist, as a member of the media. You're not there as a protester, but but you're not. What is the mindset like for you to be there as a part of the media, as an independent media? And what, what role does your personal feelings and biases play into that? Like, if you can talk about that a little bit and how that differentiates you from the other people that were down there.
I mean, we all have our opinions, and with as far as like journalistic integrity, it's really just about covering the truth. It's really just about covering what is actually happening down there. I can't say that my focus isn't biased, because the reality of it is that, yes, I'm showing factual information from both sides, and I want it to be as fair as possible. That day, the police officers were very patient with everybody, and on a majority of the days, they're very patient with everybody. But that day just like escalated, just in a big way. But for me, it was just like, again, it was making sure that there's no foul play on either side. I mean, obviously, like, 4 cars burned down that day. The College Football Hall of Fame got broken into and looted. And you want to show things that make people question what's going on, and make people realize why these things are happening, whether it's showing officers shooting tear gas at the crowd, or whether it's white people looting, or whether it's, it's things that people wouldn't, people have this this mentality of what's going on, and they have these preconceived notions of who's involved in it. But the reality of it is that they're not always necessarily the people gaslighting these protests. And that's another thing. It's like you find out shortly afterwards that there is foul play involved, and there are these undercover policemen that are starting some of these things. And it just makes you broaden your perspective. It makes you, think differently while you're out there, because you have to, you just kind of have to be aware of what's going on. It isn't just protesters and police officers, like one side on this side and one on the other.
Mm-hmm. And you've got a keen eye being a photographer, so I would imagine that that's something that you're seeing what's happening differently than other people that are down there, whether they're down there for the right reasons or for the wrong reasons. I want you to, if you can, you and I talked recently, and you told me a story about when you were down there and talking about undercover cops or bad actors being involved in really embedding themselves in the crowd. You told me a story about a guy that walked up to you and pointed one out. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, it was a few days later. I guess it was I believe it was like Wednesday or Thursday of protesting, and I was on a march down Peachtree Street, going towards Woodruff Park, going past Woodruff Park, going towards the Capitol. And as we were passing Woodruff Park on the left, I was kind of taking a break, drinking water or whatever, and one of my buddies, who's this guy that's always in the neighborhood, he's always super active, politically active, just like super active in the neighborhood and what's going on within the community. And he had pulled up to me and had pointed out this gentleman that was like walking kind of catty corner to us for a bit. And he was like, that guy is a police officer. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? He was like wearing like a black shirt. He was wearing like a black, like low pro backpack. It was clean. It wasn't like there wasn't anything hanging off of it. It looks like he had just bought it off the showroom floor, like real organized, real clean. And And I was like, that guy? And he was like, yeah, that guy's a police officer. And I was like, so as we're kind of talking about this short, like very briefly and very quietly, the guy like starts to put his handkerchief, which is a buff, neck gaiter, and he puts that over, starts putting it over his face. So I found that kind of odd. So when I roll around, my main mode of transportation is a bicycle. So I just hopped on my bike, got in front of him a little bit, and dude had just bolted into the crowd. And at that point, things just kind of changed. You have to, you learn that information, and then you see that information in front of you, and then you just, again, like as a journalist, you kind of have to keep your head on a swivel, and you have to like hear the things that are going on and establish whether like how important they are and what's going on and if they'll escalate. And, sometimes there are things that are just super quiet and super discreet, and you have to notice all of these things. So your head's always kind of on a swivel when you're around that, because I wouldn't have suspected the guy at all. I mean, but he wasn't chanting. He was just kind of like walking along with everybody else.
No, I've known you personally for a long time, and I've known you well, and I know your background. I know that you are Egyptian, of Egyptian descent. You're born here in America. Your family is in Egypt, and that you spent a lot of time in Egypt, and that I think it was in 2010. Correct me if I get my dates wrong here, but I believe that you spent a lot of time in the capital city, in Cairo, in Egypt during the revolution. And you took some incredible photographs there of people protesting. Compare those two experiences, if you will, please. Your experience in Egypt in 2010, and then compare that to what's been going on here in America this week, and tell me what you think are the similarities between those two experiences.
Yeah, I think it was 2012. I think the revolution was in 2011, January 2011, and then 2012 was still going on. This is like, I guess, towards the end of the year when the elections were going on. Or I guess maybe it was 2011. So it was while the elections were going on. And it was significantly different in a number of different ways, because one, like, protesting is very new to Egyptians. Also, for me, there was a lot of new vocabulary that I had really never learned. Like for my reality, like, Egyptians never really talked about politics. It was one of those unspoken things. Now you have all these people talking about politics, and there's all this like new vocabulary coming at me that I have to learn kind of in an instant and on a trip. But it was really interesting. There were times, where it was such a mixed crowd. It was, there during the days of protesting, there would be like a lot of older folks there, and they'd be, speaking their mind within an earshot. And if someone would come up and start arguing with them, they'd kind of shush him and give him the chance to speak after this guy spoke.
And this is in Egypt that you're talking about?
In Egypt, yeah. There was just like a rotating door of speakers in any part of this area, because it was obviously Tahrir Square, and Tahrir Square is like, kind of, it's a whole block within itself, if not like two or three. So, it was interesting to hear what people were saying about it, because I was new to the politics over there as well. But then to also hear, how patient, and see how patient everybody was with each other, and to hear that they were, just kind of bringing somebody to the side to allow them to talk, regardless of their views, if it opposed or was for or whatever. It was just to hear people say things was really interesting. And there were a few times where I'd hop in a cab, and just it would be coming from an intense moment, and I'm going through and trying to just like dial in the photos for the newspaper for them to print, and just be like, hey, here are these like 5 photos, pick whichever 5 you want, go for it. But like when you're in the cab and you're just like going through that stuff, you know, sometimes the cab drivers start talking to you without even. And for me, you know, there was so much going on at that moment outside of the cab door that once you jump in, you're like, all right, this is kind of the assignment that I need to do. I need to focus on this. I never looked at the guy that was next to me, or the cab driver that was next to me, which they're predominantly men. Um, and like he's asking me all these questions and, you know, his opinions and stuff like that. And you know, and I'm answering them in Arabic because I'm looking down on my phone, and obviously my views are very liberal and his views are very like are, you know, from when he started answering me, or when he started kind of like replying to, like, he was asking me questions, and once he started to kind of steer the conversation in a different way, I looked up and saw that he was just like a hardcore Islamist. He was a Salafi, which is, those are the guys that like moved from other countries and they're just hardcore Muslims. Like their views are definitely skewed. But you know, I was able to like sit there and talk my way into a good conversation with him, and he listened to me and I listened to him, and it was amicable, which was very interesting. And it's, you know, and I'm not saying that that's all the conversations. Those are just like the conversations that I had, uh, and what I saw, which was really great. But then, you know, in the evenings, it was like things kind of changed. You know, things would get violent sometimes, not all the time, but you know, and it was mainly the same thing. It was just like whether it's a police officer or a soldier jumping the gun and shooting gas at people, and it just changes the mood.
Well, I think you know, and you know, my wife Katie, she's a journalist, and so we're pretty close followers of news and world events and current events. We had a conversation earlier today where we talked about how other countries, or how we as Americans tend to look at other countries, like maybe that situation in Egypt, and say, like, you know, that's a different country. They're fighting for freedom. They're protesting in the streets. That's happening in America right now, right? So how do you take that experience, and how does that compare, you know, or how is it similar to what's going on in America right now? What's going on in Atlanta right now? So in all 50 states, 50 states in the past 10 days, there have been demonstrations and protests, and that's a huge deal. So, you know, our conversation was, other countries are looking at America right now the way that we've tended to look at other countries. So I feel like you have a good and a different perspective on that, being Egyptian, being a photojournalist, being in these similar situations, but in different times for different reasons. So what do you think about all that?
I mean, honestly, like, to be candid, I mean, there's racism all around the world, and that has never changed. So the good thing about what's going on here in America, I mean, for me, what America is the definition of it, and they're kind of the lighthouse for everybody else. It's to show the world that black people, white people, Muslims, Jews, Christians, whomever can live in one country peacefully and amicably and be able to work together and make themselves better. So when the world sees what is going on in the US, they see what, you know, because we've been doing this, we've had these freedoms for much longer than a lot of countries have. Like, a lot of countries haven't had the freedom to protest. So, you know, and even free press, you know, you have state-run televisions and things like that that kind of skew the news in a lot of ways. But I mean, you kind of, it's just interesting, you know. It's when you're in another country, it's like they're doing things fresh, they're doing things new, where that whole revolution started, you know, kind of the same reasons here. Someone got murdered, it lit a fire under everybody, and people took to the streets. and it's amazing to see that, and it's amazing to see how those two different cultures influence each other. But I mean, you see people in Lebanon, in Syria, in Palestine, all standing up for Black Lives Matter, and it's because they do see these discrepancies in the way that we treat people on a regular basis. And I mean, it's a great conversation starter, but also at the same time, it's, I don't know, the difference between the two is just kind of the process and how those things change and if they change, you know. One of the things that I hear a lot when I travel in general, it's, you know, when you travel a lot and you go to different countries, you know, people are just like, we know that our government is corrupt, that our government is corrupt in other countries. Like in Egypt, they're like, we know our government is corrupt. The only problem is that you guys in the US, you don't understand that your government is corrupt. So you just kind of lean into it. So that's kind of their perspective on how Americans vote and why America is the way it is, because it's just like a master of puppets type scenario.
Well, let's talk about real quick about the media's role. You know, a lot of people want to blame the media. A lot of people, you know, kind of pick the media that they believe in, that kind of speaks to them, that reinforces their existing beliefs. But you being out there as a photojournalist, and again, like you talked about, you're trying to capture the truth, right? In images, and images are so powerful, right? So we've all had images in our brains, you know, throughout the civil rights movement, human rights movement in other countries. There are really images literally burned into, you know, kind of our collective thoughts here, right? And photographs specifically. You know, where do you see the media playing the best role in telling these stories of what's going on in the streets and why people are really out there and what they're really trying to do out there?
I mean, media is important for everything that they're doing. The reality of it is that responsibility is on the user. You know, I can lean on, you know, news sources that abide by my, you know, mental structures on how the world should work and things of that nature. It's like, but that's not going to benefit me in any way, especially if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody that primarily watches Fox News and I'm somebody that watches like CNN. You know, and actually when I do get a chance to watch either of those, I get frustrated at both. You know, CNN will dwell on one subject for half an hour when there are so many other different things that are going on within the world than, you know, Trump telling everybody to inject cleaner in their bodies. And then you go on to see Fox News, and you kind of watch them manipulate their interviews, and they just kind of like lead the conversation in ways that, you know, I would not work. But the reality of that is that for me, whether it's as a journalist or as a concerned citizen, I also watch BBC News. I also watch Al Jazeera. I read the Washington Post. I read the New York Post. I read the New York Times. You know, I diversify as much as possible. And even on a local level, the AJC and Creative Loafing and Mainline Zine, you know, there are a lot of, you know, different news outlets that you can go to. And I feel like the more you know on both sides, the better equipped you are to have a well thought out conversation with somebody that disagrees with you.
So in that regard, what would you say to people in Atlanta and outside of Atlanta, in the United States, even, you know, worldwide, that they want to educate themselves more, they want to get involved, they want to be out in the streets, they want to be active in their communities? You know, I know you spend a lot of time in the community. That's something that you've poured your life into. You know, you spend a lot of time in the Atlanta community. What would you tell those people that want to get more involved in their community? How do they get started? Where do they start?
I mean, start with your friends. find out who your friends are working with and start working with them. The key is to just start doing it. I mean, you may think an organization is amazing and go into it and be like, oh, this isn't that great. But if you didn't dive into it, you would never know that. There are things that you can do. You could volunteer your time with any of your local organizations and think it's the most amazing thing in the world, or it could be completely different than you thought it was. It could be so much more, or it could be so much less. It's unless you actually like go out there and plan to do the work and put some time aside to do the work, then I think that's the most beneficial for you. That's the most beneficial for all of your friends as well, because now you have experience in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 different organizations, and you could be like, oh, you'd love going over here and working on this, and Holmes go hard and work on his farm and learn about farming and what you should be doing to compost soil and stuff like that. Or you could be working with Concrete Jungle and dropping off food to people that are in need, or there are a number of different things that you can do.
I want to ask you about your personal experiences with racism, being a brown man in America, being a Muslim in America, and beyond what's going on now this week, the last 3 weeks, the last 2 months, going back through the last 10 years. I know personally that you've had some experiences that certainly weren't pleasant from a traveling standpoint. Are there any particular experiences you can share regarding times that you've experienced racism, either subtle racism or overt, either in your personal life or even as in your professional life as a photojournalist or creative media professional?
I mean, the one that kind of speaks the loudest is honestly, the one that's most current. So, obviously, as anybody can tell, I'm pretty fair-skinned. From, I have Iranian and Turkish in my background. That gives us a lighter skin and to my side. But that's not the first thing that people think. But then, when you're in the land of authorities and they have to look at your ID, things just change. Most recently was actually when I got arrested. When I first got arrested and went in front of the CNN Center for them to book us and do all the paperwork kind of there to make it easier. Like once we actually got booked in the prison system or the correction center. I stated my name at the lady that called me initially, and then they called me to a different table immediately. Went to that different table where the FBI happened to be sitting right behind that person. So they look up my name, and she had said, the lady that was behind the computer on the police side was like, he's clear to go, meaning that I just don't have anything on my records or whatever. And then the FBI agent who was looking over her shoulder said, no, we have something on him. So, so I sat there and a conversation with these guys, again, I understand the situation that I'm in and I don't want to escalate it anymore. So I always just try and be as cordial and patient with everybody as possible. And from that point forward, I was there was like a complete communication breakdown about anything that was going on with me or whatever I was arrested for. I mean, they told me that I was arrested for, obviously, like the curfew violation. That was what I had. We were all zip tied and put on the bus with masks. And then once we got to the jail, they cut off all the zip ties. We went into the room. We went into like the holding area. And within like 10 minutes, they called me and went to a different area, like took off all my clothes, had to like wear the red jumpsuit, was in cuffs the whole time, got the bedroll and everything. They took me upstairs. I was in like population with some other folks. Obviously, this was late, so nobody was really out. There were a couple of folks yelling or whatnot. And then I went in. Obviously, like coming off Ramadan, I'm praying a lot more heavily than I usually do. So I go into my cell. I'm still cuffed. I do my prayers and whatnot, and I go to bed. The door gets knocked on later on. Anyways, long story short, they take the cuffs off and probably like in the morning before breakfast.
So you spent the night in a jail cell in handcuffs.
Yeah. And then
that's unusual.
Yeah, I figured I couldn't really do much in the jail cell, much less cuff.
Yeah.
So it didn't really hit me until I went downstairs the next day, the next afternoon around 1:00 before we went to go see the judge. They had to take mug shots and stuff like that. So I went downstairs. They took me down with probably like three other gentlemen, and we go downstairs. Two of them were wilding out, just yelling whatever nonsense. And they take us back downstairs into that holding area, and everybody that I was on the bus with was still down there in their normal clothes, not even in handcuffs. Everybody was just like hanging out in like the holding area.
And they never communicated to you why you had a different experience in the time that you were in there?
I wasn't able to get a phone call, so I wasn't able to call anybody. Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
So.
And you're going to court, right, for this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this a discussion that you're interested in having with your lawyer and trying to figure out why that happened, or is it something that you're ready to move on from?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, obviously with my demeanor and stuff like that, it's obviously like just get out of there as fast as you can. I don't want to deal with more than I have to, but also at the same time, it's like, that profiling exists, and it's one of those things where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you're not vocal about it, then, somebody of my background might not have as much patience, which is very few and far between. Not that I'm saying that people of my culture aren't patient. I'm just saying that I have way too much patience.
Do you think that the FBI had you on some sort of list because you were Muslim or Egyptian, or have you been, I feel like you've told me in the past that you've had some challenges traveling internationally, just in the times that we're living in and being Muslim young man.
Yeah, I mean, last time I traveled, I was on the most wanted list 15 times. Like my name is three of the more common names in the Arabic language. So, I mean, you get pulled aside, you get asked a bunch of questions. They repeat those questions to make sure that you answer them again, and it is a hassle. It is frustrating. But again, it's one of those things you just kind of want to get on your next flight and get the hell out of there. But the reality of it is, it's like, it's the same way when you're having conversations with friends. It's like, for the most part, a lot of my friends, only Muslim friends. So if they ever have any questions that they feel too shy or think it's too racist or think it's a dumb question to ask somebody, they always know that they could come to me and ask this question. And I think that that's great because I do have the patience to answer them. I know that they're not like inherently bad people, and it's like, their questions get answered in the proper form and with patience. And I think that's what everybody needs.
How do we as Americans, and I love how you described our country as being a light, and I think in its best light, it is a light, right, for everybody to see right now. Mm-hmm. The light might be dim, and at times it's brighter, and at times it's dimmer. But how can we all as Americans work together to make this better? Like, where do we go from here?
I mean, just realize, I think instead of fighting the problem, realizing that there is a problem, because there are a lot of Americans that don't understand that this is a problem. I mean, even folks that I know really well are just waking up to the idea of systematic racism as like a foundational thing. I mean, what's happening now is great in the way that people are now seeing this stuff put in their face. I don't think that they understand the extent of it, but the more it gets pounded and pounded and pounded into their face, I'm not just talking about videos of police brutality. I think that's too much, but a lot of stuff that's coming out right now is just like, all right, here's a list of literature that you should read if you really want to be an ally. Here are different things that you can do with your money or with your time that you can do. But I mean, the stuff is playing out in front of your face. I mean, specifically, like you have here in Atlanta, you have 2 black police officers. They run up on 2 black students in a car where there are white people in front of them, but they run up to the 2 black students, regardless of the situation, break into their windows, pull them out, beat them and tase them, and then take them to jail. The mentality that goes into that is that I, as a police officer, can beat and pull these 2 black people out of their cars, take them to jail, and I won't be questioned.
While there's people around with cameras all over the place.
While I'm being, I mean, and that's the thing that happened in Minnesota, but with George Floyd, it's like
Right.
He feels that he can do it, and regardless of him being recorded, he's going to go back into the system, and everything is going to be fine. But to see that with 2 black police officers, then you know that there's this Stockholm syndrome, but you also know that the system is messed up in that sense that even they feel like they can get away with it, and even they think that it's fine.
So those 2 officers now, they had been fired, I believe, and charged, and
Yeah.
they are suing Mayor Bottoms. I read
The 2
yesterday,
guys
I believe.
are suing Mayor Bottoms.
They're suing the city of Atlanta and the mayor of Atlanta now.
Interesting.
The 2 officers that you were just talking about. I think it's actually a group of like 4 officers or maybe more.
4 officers.
Yeah. Sharif, how can people, you've got some amazing photographs on Instagram and you've got amazing photographs in other places. How can people keep up with you to see the photos that you're taking of what's going on right now, and also connect with you and just follow you, and even if they want to reach out to, potentially use some of your photography for commercial purposes, how do they connect with you?
My Instagram account is SharifH3, and then my commercial photography stuff is Sharif Photo, SharifPhoto. And then my website is Sharif Hassan, SharifHassan.com. And that's usually where I have all my portfolios, all my kind of story setups. Usually the up-to-date stuff is on my Sharif H3 or on my Twitter handle, which is Sharif Photo as well.
What is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything else that you have to say to anybody that might be listening to this about what's going on right now in America and in the world?
Something a good friend taught me a long time ago that I used to work with when we worked in sales, and you know him, Sean Barbeau. He had, I was very young when I started working with Hooked and with this magazine back in the day, and he was one of the stronger sales guys that worked on the same floor as we did. And he always told me that the person that talked the least was the person that wins the conversation, because that person is spending more time listening than they are expressing their own ideas. Like when I meet folks, I try and talk the least because I already know what my thoughts and opinions are. I want to hear something that comes out of them that may spark something else. Like, don't get me wrong, everything they say might not be relevant, but there could be that like one thing that sparks a new thought in your head or a new perspective, and you can lean into those things. If you don't allow that person to talk, then you really don't make yourself susceptible to those types of ideas.
I love that, man. Yeah, Sean taught me a lot too. He's a great guy, and that's back in the days that Sharif and I actually met. I think it was about 17 years ago. It was about the time that you probably got that advice.
Yeah.
Working for the old Hooked on the Outdoors magazine, the most powerful magazine in the world at one time. Sharif, I just want to thank you, man, for joining us today. I appreciate you. I love you, man. I'm glad you're safe. Thank you for telling these stories, man, with your camera, and keep it up, man. Keep it up. Keep putting those photos out, and can't wait to see the rest of them that I haven't seen yet from the last several days.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much, man. I really appreciate it. This is an awesome setup that you guys have.
Yeah, we'll get you back on here, man, for sure.
Yeah. Love y'all. Be great.
We just want to sincerely thank our guest, Sharif Hassan, for joining us today and just being real about his experiences with racism, being a protest photojournalist, and social justice and equality in America. So thank you very much, Sharif. Vertical River is committed to telling meaningful stories and amplifying important voices. That's what we're all about. If you like what you heard today, please share it with your friends and your network. Keep up with us for more stories here on Into the Current.